This podcast may not be suitable for young listeners.
I'm aware of the bonds that were created today. When you told me that sure there's a way.
Steve Lilly, journal entry number 5. Squatch operators, Lewis and Hook. I once lived in Florida. I was there for 2 years. I made one good friend there and I miss her today. From Florida, I moved to South Louisiana and I worked in the oil industry in the shallow water of the Gulf for 3 years. It was good work and the pay was good. Living in a fifth wheel on the waterway was right up my alley. We didn't get many days off, but when we did, I got to fish, and that's all I did in my time off, and that was the best part of living on that ugly coast. A welder is always busy in the industry if he can get on and build a reputation. Well, I never ran short of work. I'd still be there now if the work had not played out. It was a good time in my life, and I learned what a regular life looked like. Then it was on to Arkansas, where my best friend from high school and I lived in a small cabin way up in the Ozarks. His name is Harold Johnson. We were kids when Harold caught the name Hook, and it stuck. No one called him Harold after that. I suppose his mother would still call him Harold if she was alive, but Hook is his name now. He was the best tight end in the city when he and I played ball together. Hook went all state and was recruited by all the big colleges in the South: Ole Miss, Alabama, Kentucky, Memphis State. He should have taken one of those scholarships. His life would be different now, but he had no interest in going to school. I think Hook's vision of college was frat boys dressed in penny loafers and pink shirts. That wasn't Hook's style. Everyone that knew him said he should have gone to play ball for one of those big teams and get his college free. Hook quit school in the middle of his senior year. A man spends 12 years of his life in school. He's 3 months away from graduating with a high school diploma, and he walks away from that and a full scholarship to a major university. Well, I guess some men are that way. I was forced to do that, but Hook chose it. He got the name Hook by winning a game in the last seconds for us when he and I were in the 10th grade. A few seconds left on the clock in the fourth quarter, and we were down 6 points. It was the last game of the season. We had to win. We had to score on this play, or in our minds we'd hang our heads in shame the rest of our lives. Well, now those things don't seem so important. They sent Hook straight off the line, 30 yards to the goal line, where he stopped and pivoted. It's called a hook pattern. We watched the film afterward, and Hook looked like a ghost, all blurry in the footage. When he stopped a yard in front of the goal line, he should have flown on into the end zone because he was running so fast, but he didn't. Our quarterback had thrown the ball before Hook had made his move, so the ball was rocket firing at his back. Had he not run that hook pattern so fast, the ball would have hit him in the back of the head. Well, I think Hook and the quarterback were in sync that day because, in a flash, his hands came up and he caught that ball and stepped into the end zone. And then the extra point sealed the deal, and Harold Johnson was a hero for the day. In the film room, the coaches started calling him Hook because they had never seen a kid or a grown man in the pros, for that matter, run a hook pattern so well. Now, it is a simple pattern, but there was something about the way he did it that made it special. The name stuck, and nobody called him Harold after that day. Now, Hook will never tell this story. People ask him how he got his name. Well, that's my name, he says, and the subject goes to something else right away. Hook is not a big talker. In the Ozarks, Hook was in seclusion, in a way. He had made a decision, and people were after him. You'll get to know Hook better as I make these journals public, and you'll understand better when you know what he does and who his associates are. He had called me and told me where he was and did I want to come hang out for a weekend. Well, I didn't tell him this on the phone call, but I was waiting on fate to throw something my way so I wouldn't have to decide where to go next. I had no work now in the oil fields, and he thought I was coming for the weekend for beers and football games on TV. But I was coming to stay. Well, Hook was fine with that, and we had 2 good years of getting to know each other again. It was another good time in my life. I like solitude, but if I were ever forced to spend time with other humans, Hook would be the guy to hang out with. But I am happier living alone. It took 2 years for him to get the call that it was clear for him to go back to Memphis and resume his life. He asked me to come with him. For 38 years I had not been back to my hometown, not even to visit family. I couldn't and didn't want to go back to the place where I thought others would be in danger for something I did all those years ago. Maybe it was my mind conditioning me to never think about it, or maybe it just never crossed my mind. But Hook spent an afternoon on the back porch of our rented cabin and explained that my enemies were either dead or too old to pose a threat. Well, that made sense, and 2 days after Hook left, I loaded my truck and I headed east. Seeing that big green bridge stirred memories that I had choked down. Remembering Hook's logic and settling in a bit, the Memphis skyline began to call me home in a small way. I had not seen the city in 38 years. In my pocket was enough cash to get me through a month or 2 if I could find a cheap place to live. I was effectively broke, and I needed a job and a place to live where I could blend in. Hook and I stayed at his father's place in Midtown for a few days until we got our own places. I found a job the day after we arrived. I walked into a steel fab shop on President's Island and asked if they needed help, and I was hired on the spot. I got in 6 hours that day. It was a good place to work. Hook's father, Harold Sr., had a buddy who owned a trailer park in South Memphis. The man told me he had a spot open, if I could find a trailer, and he would rent it to me cheap. Well, needing an economical place to live, that sounded just right. So movers hauled my new/used trailer in on Monday. It was a single wide in good shape, and it was a bargain. Living in a trailer appealed to me. I thought back to the years in Louisiana. This would be perfect for me, I thought. Almost like camping every day, except there's people everywhere, and I look forward to getting settled in. When you move into a conventional neighborhood, people come to see you. They welcome you to the neighborhood, and they bring you a plate of brownies and figure out who you are and decide if they're happy with their new neighbor or not. Well, that's not the case in a trailer park. The residents are renters and they don't stay long. They rent trailers already set in the park, and it's owned by landlords. The lot I rented had been cleaned off the week before. The trailer sat in this spot for 20 years and had been rented to several people. The last renters, a 60-something dude and his old lady, had been set up there for less than 3 months. They fought all the time, frequently whipping the shit out of each other. Cops were called weekly to break up the fights and haul the fat old man off to jail. Soon he was back, remarkably, madly in love with his old lady again and ready to patch things up, only to become disillusioned with the relationship a few days later. She nagged him all the time, he said, and that caused him to drink beer, which caused her great anguish, which caused him frustration. It started innocent enough. Voices would be raised and the anxiety would increase. And this would go on for a day or 2 until she hit him in the head with an ashtray, provoking him to knock her ass out, meaning he would be back in jail again for the next few days. Throughout all this commotion, the mouth breathers stood around and they watched. It was great entertainment when you have nothing to do. The way I heard the story, on the last night they lived there, she was on 911 screaming that she had just woken up from being knocked out and had had it with this son of a bitch. She was going to burn the house down. Well, by the time the MPD got there, the old trailer was blazing. Hell, she wasn't kidding. These relationships follow endless cycles, and I think the people involved actually enjoy the lifestyle. They would be bored without the conflict. So trailer park residents don't come out to meet you when you move in, but they will sit in the bed of their rusted out trucks or in lawn chairs and watch from windows to see the work being done. Again, something to do when you have nothing to do. No need to introduce themselves because you'll more than likely be gone within 3 or 4 months. Nobody's looking to make a friend. However, a new resident is sized up and assessed, and if it looks like he has a job, meaning he has money in his pocket, everybody wants to be a friend. So here's some advice from a trailer park resident. The worst thing you can do as a new resident in a trailer park is give one of these rotten teeth meth heads a ride somewhere. They will never leave you alone. Always say no to giving anyone a ride. You'll be better off. The new trailer had been spotted and leveled, and utilities were being hooked up, and my landlord had a new septic tank installed for me. Last was the water hookup, which I did myself, and it was time to start moving my small amount of furniture inside. I had a couple hours of daylight left, and I got busy, and I was going to have all this done in one day and sleep in my new home that night. Well, Lilly was with me. Lilly is my dog. I found her a few years back in Louisiana, or maybe she found me. She had been with me for a few years, and there was no need to keep an eye on her. Lilly stayed with me no matter what, but there were kids riding bikes and playing in the gravel roads, and she loved kids, and off she went for the day of socializing. Meanwhile, I struggled with the heavy stuff while these lazy sacks of shit drank Mountain Dew and passed the weed, watching me move furniture up the flimsy front steps and wiggle that stuff in my door. An hour after dark, I had 2 items left on the trailer, and I was done. It was a sleeper sofa and a big-ass recliner I had bought used. Well, I struggled with the recliner, and I finally got it inside, but that damn sofa was going to be a bull. I worked with it for a while, twisting in every direction imaginable, and it still protruded out the front door of my trailer like a corn dog stuck in a kid's mouth. I sat on the trailer having a smoke and a beer when from behind me I heard a voice asking if I needed help. Well, I didn't turn around and ask this asshole where he had been all day. I wasn't interested in making enemies on day one, so I turned to see who was talking to me. "You got a smoke?" he asked. Without words, I pulled the pack out of my shirt pocket and I flipped one out, and out reached an enormous black hand that could easily cover half a basketball. I had seen him down at the end of the row with several people around him. They had been hanging out down there all day. Well, I just figured he was a popular guy. "Let me help you get that couch up into your house. Just take a minute," he said. Well, he was a big man. He had a shaved head, and he was heavy-set with a lean waist. Something about this man made me think of John Coffey from the Green Mile movie. With his help, I'd be done with this job in a minute, and I agreed. We walked to the sofa, and he twisted it in a position that would fit right in the door, all by himself. The front door was blocked, so I ran to the back door and climbed the 4 feet into the house and ran to lift the dead end of that sofa. That's where I found it was already in the house when I got there. He was now picking up the sofa in the middle. "Where do you want it?" he said. Well, I pointed to the wall, and he gently set it down. "Hey, you want a beer?" I asked. "If it's cold," he said. They were in a cooler in the bed of my truck, and I came back with 4. And I closed the door, and we both sat down at the kitchen table. "How'd you work this deal with the new trailer?" he asked. "Well, Randy is a friend of a friend, and he let me rent the lot." The man popped the lid on his beer, and he said, "Well, Randy's all right. I never had any trouble with him. He's fair." "Yep," I said. "I'm Lewis. My name's Lewis Shanks. Steve Lilly. Nice to meet you." We both finished off the beers and sat staring at the walls in an uncomfortable silence. My read was that he wasn't a conversation person. I don't like many people. Socializing is not my thing, but this man was okay. The thing that sold me on Lewis was when Lilly came storming into the trailer after playing with the kids all afternoon. She was hot and that tail was wagging 90 miles an hour. She ran right to Lewis and tucked her head down between his knees. That's what Lilly does when she hugs someone. She bulls her head all over you as long as you have your hands on her and she won't move. Well, I expected Lewis to jump out of his skin at the sight of this charging pit bull, but he never flinched. Instead, he leaned over and he loved on that dog the way I do. And he scratched her neck and scratched her ears and he talked to her. She had already ruined Lewis. Sitting there watching this bond between beast and man made me warm inside. And right then and there, I began to trust Lewis Shanks. Dogs will tell you those things about people. "All right," he said. "You set up now?" "Yep," I said. "I stayed just down the end of this road in that blue trailer," he said. "I got the best lot in the place. I can get things for you. Come see me if you need anything." "All right, will do," I said. Get things for me? What the hell did that mean? Drugs popped into my head, and I figured that was it. I didn't give a damn. I wouldn't be needing that. But later, I would need some things, and he was my go-to guy. Well, I walked Lewis out, and I shook his big hand and watched him walk to his trailer with Lilly walking right by his side. It was dark, but I could see that his spot was the best place on the lot. All lit up and 6 or 8 people already on his porch. Lewis was popular. "Lilly," I yelled, and she sprinted right back to me. "I'm going to take that dog home, Steve," I heard Lewis say. Well, I smiled. I liked that guy, I whispered to no one. We walked up into our new castle, and this would be my home for the next several years. Over the next 2 years, Lewis and I became good friends. He knew he could count on me, and I felt the same. But little did I know that Lewis and I would become some of the most prolific and vicious Bigfoot hunters that ever lived. It took Lewis a couple of hunts to get into it and find his ground, but when he got it, no Bigfoot would ever stand a chance. It had been a week after I killed old Scarback. If you haven't heard how that went, you can listen to journal entry number 4. I had just gotten home from work and ate some Chinese carryout, and I sat down to read. Lilly lay on the sofa watching me. She always watched me. I think she missed Rufus, and there was no way to explain to her what had happened and that he was not coming home. But she enjoyed the sofa, and she laid on her back watching me upside down with her head dangling off the edge. I tried to get into the novel I was reading, but my mind kept drifting to the deal I agreed to with the government men. Well, I wondered when I'd get a call to hunt the next squatch. It had been 3 weeks since I even knew squatches existed. I had killed 2 while I was duck hunting one day. Before then, Sasquatches were just about joking with people. The whole thing had been an accident in a way, a fit of rage on my part. I had never seen a Bigfoot and thought they were a product of large imaginations. Well, last week, while hunting, I had watched them kill a real good dog. Watching those sons of bitches prance around in those woods trying to take Rufus's carcass from each other like it was a game. Hell, just thinking about it now pisses me off. And it felt good to step out and drop both of them, and it hadn't been hard. I went over everything I could remember about that day. Every detail now was important, along with the hunt on old Scarback. Memorizing everything was important now because I needed to be able to anticipate what these things would do. They were powerful animals. If one of those things got a hold of me, it would only take a second to do me in. I couldn't let that happen. The only way to prevent that was to try and kill them at a distance and not let them get too close. But that wasn't going to work, though. I had to be up close to kill these things. Everything I remembered about these filthy creatures led me to close-up kills. Nothing risked, nothing gained, right? They were going to pay me good money to take these creatures out, and there's no way to make it easy. I wouldn't hear from them for another few days, though. I had time to get ready, but I know myself. I don't do well when I overthink anything. No amount of thought was going to help me right now. And I had as much information about their behavior as I was going to get at this point, so I cracked my book back open and read a couple of chapters before Lilly and I turned in. The next Sunday, I had not received the call. Anxious and ready to get something done, I was fidgety, and something rare for me. I think I needed to get in the game and kill another one to settle all the questions I had bouncing around in my head. And I remembered the head guy, Agent Blue, I think it was. He said there were 6 more of these things on Island 58. Well, I'd been on that island 100 times and I'd never seen one. Apparently, there were 8 of them there the whole time. None of this made any sense. Had they known I was there all these months that I had trespassed on that land? Probably not, but it made me wonder just how smart these things were. I had heard Bigfoot stories through the years, and I wrote all those stories off as people with screws loose, goofy sumbitches sometimes. But now I knew at least some of the stories had to be true, so don't write off everything you hear in the trailer park. Well, I had vacation saved up, and work was slow, and we were waiting on Steele to come in to start a new job. So I had some time, and I called my boss, and I told him I was taking 2 days off. No problem, he said. And at daylight the next day, I was going to be on that island to see what I could see. At $5,000 a head, maybe I could make some money. I hadn't been hired to kill these last 6, but a squatchhead was a squatchhead, and I didn't have anything else to do. I figured they were all expendable. Extinction was the word that Agent Blue had used, and I was counting on getting paid for anything I killed. So with my rifle and shotgun clean and ammo loaded in my rucksack, my boat hooked up, I went to bed with my alarm set to 3 a.m. I hit the kill switch on the motor a few yards from the bank and let the boat slide up on a sandbar. Duck season had ended just a few days before, and I doubted the shitheads that managed this place would be working today. I hated all of them. That's the main reason I trespassed on that place, just to do it and piss them off. But today, I wouldn't be dealing with any of those guys. I knew where they were, laying on their fat asses on a couch or at a diner somewhere bragging about all the ducks they called in for the doctors. And not one of them was worth a shit. With the whole island to myself, I felt relaxed, and I could spend all day here and act like I owned the place. And I headed into the timber. After an hour of walking through some of the thickest shit I could find, everything looked normal. I kicked up several deer, which I would have killed on a regular day, but I passed. Deer don't pay $5,000 a head. What was I looking for anyway? Tracks? I had looked at the ground the whole way and hadn't seen anything. I needed to learn what to look for, so I kept walking. According to Agent Blue, there were 6 on this island. 6 left after I had killed the first 2. If they were here, maybe I could make contact. It was noon when I reached the south end of the island. I was taking the easiest route, staying on dry land. Deer always look for dry ground. That's where the food is. And even though a deer doesn't mind water, they don't stay in it. I thought the squatches would be the same, but maybe I was thinking all wrong. Those things move remarkably well in water. Hell, they were on me in a flash the day I killed those first 2. I knew that the closer I was to the river, the higher the ground would be, but the closer I was to the oxbow, the more water I would have to navigate. I found the first 2 in water, and that's where I needed to be, I guess. My boat was on the north end of the island, and I walked to the south end and covered a lot of ground. Timber and fields and some low areas with a foot of water. I headed east a half a mile and then turned due north straight back to my boat. Now this route would be much tougher, and some of that part of the island was under 3 to 4 feet of water. It was cold, and I wasn't in waders, but if I kept moving, I thought I could keep my blood pumping to stay warm. By the time I made the left turn to head north, I was in 2 feet of water. It was colder than I imagined, and I picked up the pace. There is no way to move fast and quiet in water. Anything within a quarter mile would have heard me. Well, I couldn't stop now, even to rest. I had to get back to the boat and then get warm. There was a moment when I regretted this move. It was halfway to the boat, but my regret was washed away by the noises ahead that were strange to my ears. Something or someone was chattering. They were talking some kind of gibbly. And that's what we call foreign languages and the people who speak them. A guy who speaks gibbly is also known as a gibbly. And I heard gibblies in the distance. Now, they didn't know I was there because I think they would have shut up. Did the hunting club have immigrants working here? The voices sounded a little bit like Spanish, but hell, I don't know one language from another. It's all gibbly to me. I stood silent under an overcast gray sky, and I just listened. The wind picked up from the north, and I started to shiver. Buckbrush went on forever. Now that is a large green shrub in the summer. The plants are spaced close, and the thick branches grow into each other. They're great areas to catch crappie during the spring spawn, and they flourish in standing water and are able to survive droughts. During the winter with no leaves, it's a creepy-looking place, though. And when you get into a buckbrush stand, it's easy to get turned around. The limbs are brittle and they have no sap, and they self-prune each winter, and if you run a boat into the limbs, they snap and crack. And it was February, so I had to pick my way through the brush to move and remain silent. There is never a clear path through these things, so I was constantly moving and picking my way to find gaps. This I did, taking small steps, feeling the bottom as I walked, making sure I didn't step off in a hole or do anything to make much noise. And each step got me closer to the gibbly chatter. The brush grew all the way to the bank, with a shallow moat around a small patch of dry ground ahead of me. A couple of rows from the water's edge, I stopped and tucked myself into a pot of buckbrush, and I watched. Branches and limbs mostly obscured my view, but I could see well enough to know what I was seeing. 3 massive hulking beasts were moving around on the bank. I don't know what they were doing or talking about, but at least I confirmed it was not a crew of immigrants working on a duck blind. These were full-grown squatches. My first impulse was to back away and get out of there, but thinking about the hell that I had been through to get to this point gave me a different perspective. All that work to get here to kill a monster, and now that I had him, and I was going to go back out? Well, hell no, I wasn't going to do that. I've heard it said that no good thing is ever accomplished without a plan, but I didn't have a plan. I was standing in 2 feet of water, freezing my ass off. Nothing to do here but move straight at him, and that's exactly what I did. My rifle was strapped to my back, and in my hand was my 11-87 with a full mag full of buckshot. This was going to be close work, but I was confident. I ducked under some branches and pushed through a few more, and I was in the moat. The branches cracked and made a hell of a noise getting there, and the gibblies shut up. They knew I was there. There was no turning back now. In the 3 minutes it took me to get there, the creatures had moved to the bank looking for whatever was coming. When I stepped into the clear, you should have seen the look on their faces. These sumbitches aren't used to seeing a human walk right in on them. 2 stood in the water, and I could have whacked one with a 14-foot crappie pole. The one closest to me had a log in his hand, and he immediately raised it to throw it. I hit him in the throat with the first shot. The log dropped in the water, and the other 2 stood in disbelief at what had just happened. They stared at their buddy laying in the muddy water, bubbles rising from his throat as he drowned. Well, I took a step forward, and I fell off in a hole. Well, I had walked 200 yards and missed every hole in this field, Now that it counted, I fell in one. Just my luck. The trigger was about to drop when I leaned forward, and the headshot to number 2 went through his thigh, kicking it out from under him and backwards, and he fell face first in the water. When I regained my balance, water poured out the front of my barrel, and I was looking at this ugly thing inches from my face. A quick pull on the trigger kept him down. Instincts took my barrel up to the smaller one still on the bank, but he was gone. I heard him crashing away as he ran. Apparently, he saw what was happening and didn't want any of that. Well, that was fine with me. I had $10,000 laying in front of me, bleeding in the water. While the adrenaline was pumping, I pulled a machete from my belt and went to take the head of the closest monster. Number 1 started moving again, but I didn't think he was going anywhere, so I finished with the first one and took Big Boy's head while he was still blowing bubbles out of his punctured windpipe. With head secured in my tote sack and strapped to my back, I went back down in the water and pulled my compass and got a northwest bearing back to the boat. There were 6 on this island, according to Agent Blue. Now there were 4. I wondered if these animals held a grudge. I didn't know, but I wasn't taking any chances, so I made good time back to the boat. I came out on the cutoff on a sandbar a football field away from my boat. I was glad to be out of the water. 2 miles in 2 feet of water will wear a fella out, and I was bordering on hypothermia. Dry ground never felt so good under my feet, and I didn't stop to rest. The boat was visible. I just had to get there. The closer I got to the boat, the more of the boat I could see as I walked around the curve in the sandbar. And when the whole boat was in view, I saw something dark in the trees a few feet back in those woods. Now, was I being paranoid? There's no way those things were waiting on me, I thought. They couldn't be that smart. But just to be sure, I pulled my rifle under my arm with the sling sliding over my shoulder, and the scope went right to my eye. What the hell was that? These sumbitches cannot be that smart, I thought. Set up on my boat to ambush me? There is no way. As much as I didn't believe they would do this, there he was. I could make out the outline of the body in the leafless brush. He was even turning his head like he was talking to the others. I could hear him whispering something in Ghibli, and if I could interpret it, it would be, "Here comes that dumb son of a bitch, y'all get ready." Kneeling down to get a better rest, I centered his head up and laid the crosshairs on his nose, and I sent a 168-grain Nosler ballistic tip into his head. Ballistic tips fragment on impact, and instead of the bullet staying in one piece and expanding as it travels through biological matter, it breaks into pieces, scrambling the brain if you hit something in the head. I heard his body hit the ground with a thud. Another round was pushed in with my boat, and I scanned the woods looking for movement. Another one was charging straight at me in the brush to my left. He had another 50 yards before he got to me, but I dropped him at 40. I don't know where I hit him, but it was a good feeling watching him tumble forward. If Agent Blue was telling me the truth, there were 2 left. I couldn't see them, so I sat tight and I waited. If the others had attacked, I knew the last 2 would be right behind them. I looked at my watch and I saw 4:15 p.m. It would soon be dark, and I had to get in that boat and get moving in the daylight. To be stuck here in the dark meant I might not get off this island. At 4:25, I jumped up from my kneeling position and I sprinted to the boat, shotgun at the ready. When I reached the boat, nothing had come for me, and I threw all my gear in the boat, including the 2 heads. With my shotgun pointed toward the woods, and my right foot slowly went in the front of the boat and then my left, and I reached over the front and cut the rope I used to tie the boat to a tree, and I pushed off, immediately heading back to the motor. My Yamaha outboard started on the first punch of the button. I threw it in gear and half-twisted the accelerator on the tiller, and I eased down the bank. That's right, I went down the bank, I should have called it a day, but maybe one or both of the two remaining would peek their heads out and give me a target. Now, parallel with the creature that had been coming at me, I ran the bow of the boat up onto the sandbar, and I was about to get out with my machete in hand when two enormous monsters walked out, hovering over that body. Thinking better of this idea, I went into reverse and headed out into bigger water. Now, I'm not brave and I'm not stupid. I had pushed my luck as it was. It was time to go. It was now dark, and I flipped on the front light. 20 cold minutes later, I was at the ramp. Shivering, I loaded the boat, and then I headed north to Memphis. It was a long time after the heater warmed me, and I shivered almost all the way home. This is what it felt like to be alive. Lewis must have seen me back in my boat under the canopy because he walked to my place with 2 beers in his hand. I must have looked horrible. "What the hell you been into, Steve?" Well, I'm not a good liar, but this came quick. I don't think he believed me. "I fell out of my boat. I'm a dumbass," I said. Fell out? Fell out where?" Lewis asked. "In the water, goddammit," I said, looking at him like he was an idiot. "You been fishing?" he asked. "Why all the questions, Lewis? You writing a book?" Well, I was getting pissed off, and he knew it. All right, sorry to be nosy." "Oh, it's okay, Lewis, I'm just wore out," and I regretted jumping in his shit. I could see he was interested in the sack on the boat. Blood had soaked through. The whole sack was red. I needed to distract him and get him away from the boat. "Come on inside, Lewis, while I get into some dry clothes," I said. He walked around the back of the boat toward the house and reached in and touched the sack. 2 huge cannonball-sized shapes were outlined. He knew something was off, and I asked him not to touch it. "Come on in, Lewis, I'll explain," I said. He followed me in the back door, looking back at the boat as we walked. Concern was written all over his face. Finally, out of the shower and into some dry clothes, I walked in the kitchen. Lewis had already squished out hamburgers and was frying them in the skillet. By this point in our friendship, we made ourselves at home at each other's house. "You want cheese on yours, Steve? How about I drag it through the garden?" he asked, with his back to me, chopping onions and slicing tomatoes. "Oh, that sounds good, Lewis," I said. He slid the burgers into the buns and sat a paper plate in front of me that should have bent double with the weight of that burger. "Steve, now tell me what you into. Now, I saw those cars at your house last weekend. Those were government cars. You ain't some informant, are you? Does this have something to do with that?" "Look," I said, "this isn't anything you could dream up, and I'm not into some kind of bad shit, and those aren't human heads in that sack. I know what you're thinking." Well, Lewis took a giant bite and chewed while staring at me, waiting on an answer. Nothing rattled this guy. He had seen it all. In Memphis, he had connections. What connections, I didn't know. I wasn't in that scene, but Lewis had been around. And it was rare, but once a month, unsavory characters would park at his house in cars that were way above trailer park level. Men in suits, and they looked like lawyers, and they'd walk inside and leave a short time later. Well, I never asked questions, but I knew something was up. He was my friend, and I trusted him enough that if there was something I needed to know, he would tell me. And until that day came, I stayed out of that man's business. Now, Lewis was single, and he lived alone. He didn't have a job. His days were spent at the trailer park. Twice each month, he would leave before daylight, and he would drive alone in an older model SUV and return late that night. His lifestyle was moderate. He drove used cars. He lived in a trailer park. There was nothing flashy about this guy. He dressed nice, but casual. He had an air about him, though, and you knew this guy was smart. Whatever he was into, he kept it in check. Now, I knew Lewis had done some time in prison. I never asked him what for, but considering the little I did know, I assumed he was into something nefarious. I had a feeling he was good at it, and he knew how to keep his cover. Just another dude in the trailer park as far as everyone was concerned. Who would suspect anything? Well, he chewed his burger and stared straight at me, waiting on me to talk. Well, I wasn't going to say a word. I just needed him to know that I wasn't a murderer. I thought I had proved that by not killing those tweakers who had beat up Loretta. Still, I guess I would wonder about a guy who had 2 bloody things in a tote sack that were shaped like heads. Silence never bothered me in a conversation, but this was like fingernails on a chalkboard. I knew something and he wanted to know it. I should have changed the subject, but instead I blurted out, "All right, Lewis, I'm a bounty hunter in my spare time. I don't hunt men, though. I hunt varmints for the game and fish department. Those aren't coyotes in those sacks, Steve. If you don't want to talk about it, I'm cool with that, but you don't look good. Maybe this ain't your thing." "Oh, yeah, it's my thing, and you're making me nervous talking about this shit. That's what's bothering me," I said, taking my first bite of the burger. If I kept taking on groups of Bigfoot larger than 2, I wasn't going to last long. These things were smarter than I gave them credit. 4 Bigfoot, as a group, had made their way to my boat and waited on me. Now that takes thought and intelligence. The questions were many, and if I overthought it, I would lose what little edge I had, if I had any. One thing kept nagging me all the way home, though. I needed someone with me watching my back. One man hunting these things would never do, and I actually began to consider myself lucky I had come out alive both times. But the score was 6-0, and I had just gotten started. I was doing something right. In my mind, I could see the 2 I had to leave on the bank that day. If those 2 had not tracked me down on the sandbar, I'd be $10,000 better off. Now I was considering going back to get those heads and maybe even make it 4. I rolled the dice and decided to tell Lewis everything, hoping he would join me, but I had to skirt the subject and not get right into the details. "Were you ever in the military, Lewis?" Lewis swallowed the last bite and his face lit up. "I was in the Marine Corps, 3-7, 29 Palms. I went to Iraq in 91. I think he was proud of his achievement." "So you know how to handle weapons," I said. It wasn't a question. I knew every Marine could handle a rifle. And then I asked, "You ever done any hunting?" "Well, when I was a kid." "Where are you going with this, Steve?" There was no way to beat around the bush on this, so I told him the whole story. I described the 2 I killed the weekend before and the 4 I took out that day. I described the hunt in Chester County at Mr. Bullock's place and how I used the junkies at bait. Lewis looked like he didn't believe me, and he stared at me like I was crazy. "Bigfoot my ass," he said. "Come out back and I'll show you, Lewis." With my headlamp shining in the boat, I lifted the bag and the 2 heads rolled out. That's the ugliest shit I ever seen in my life, man. I thought Bigfoot had a nice face, like Harry and the Hendersons and all. These things are nasty. Yeah, well, they aren't nice at all either. Every one of these things tried to kill me. I rolled the heads back into the sack and walked to the back porch and put them in the freezer. We walked inside and sat down, and Lewis went to the fridge and pulled out 2 beers and sat down, and then he asked, "Why are you telling me all this, Steve?" That was when I told him how much they were paying me for each kill. His eyes got wide and his mouth made the shape of a donut. "That means you have $10,000 in your freezer right now?" he said. "That's right," I said. "There's 2 more dead ones laying on that island. And I couldn't get the heads because their partners ran me off. Now I want to go back and get them, but I need someone watching my back. And that's why I'm telling you now. I want to cut you in on this, Lewis." "How do we get paid?" Lewis asked. "It's cash in a gym bag," I said. "All right, I'm interested." "Okay, I'm going back tomorrow morning to try to behead the corpses. You in?" "What's my cut on this?" asked Lewis. "I keep 100% of the 4 I already killed. It's 50-50 on every kill you're in on after that. If we do another hunt, we split everything down the middle." "All right, that's fair enough," he said. "Do you have a weapon?" I asked. "Don't worry about that," he said with a sly grin. "All right, be ready at 3:30 a.m. I like to get an early start." "You think the bodies will be there?" asked Lewis. "I don't know, but for $10,000 apiece, we got to try." "Yes, we do," Lewis said. He stood and walked out my back door. Before he left, he raised the lid of the freezer and he looked in. "You say these things are mean? Meanest damn creature in North America, and they can think, too. Now, this ain't no safe way to make money, Lewis, and you need to know that." "I'll hold my own," he said, and walked to his house. In just a few hours, he was going to find out that I wasn't kidding. The boat slid to a stop on the sandbar in the same spot I used yesterday. It was still dark, but the eastern sky was showing light. I could tell it would be another overcast day, maybe even rain. Lewis got out front and pulled us another 2 feet up on the bank, and I handed him the heavy bag he had placed in the back seat of my cab, never asking him what it was, but I was curious. Laying it on the ground, he unzipped the bag and pulled out a military-style machine gun. "What the hell is that, Lewis?" I asked. "It's an M49 SAW, Steve, full auto, belt-fed, gas-operated killing machine." "Damn, Lewis, I don't even want to ask where you got that thing." "Good," he said. "Don't ask because I won't tell you. But there's more where that came from." I was starting to suspect how Lewis made his living. "What do we do now?" he asked. "I don't have a plan, Lewis. I didn't see the one I killed down the bank when we pulled in. The other one should be laying right behind you. We both searched the area and blood was everywhere, but there was no body." "So what now?" Lewis asked. "Let's make some noise. I feel like they know we're here already, but let's make sure." I walked back to the boat and I started rattling the paddle around in the bottom. "There goes the element of surprise," Lewis said. "I think we'll do better if they come to us. Now, just get ready, Lewis." Lewis reached into his bag and placed another magazine of belted ammo in his rucksack and then moved to his left up the sandbar into the brush. "Where the hell you going, Lewis?" I yelled. "If you're bringing them straight to us, we don't need to be caught together, Steve. I'm getting into the weeds and I'm going to flank whatever's coming. Trust me, Steve, this is standard operating procedure." Well, I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, but spreading out seemed like a good idea. I walked into the woods and I started singing. I wanted those assholes to hear me, get pissed off and come to us so we could see them. The last thing you want is one of these things sneaking around on you. They're harder to kill that way, plus it's dangerous. It didn't take long. Maybe they remembered my voice or my scent. I felt like something about me killing their buddies triggered the response, and I could hear them coming from 2 directions. One was at my 3 o'clock and the other was at my 9, coming right at Lewis. I crossed my fingers that he would be okay. Now, low in the brush and almost totally concealed, I waited. It's not like these things are being real stealthy. I heard a freight train coming through the trees. The sound would come from ground level and then up in the trees, and I knew now these things could climb like a monkey. I saw that dark-colored bastard now. He was creeping and crawling on the ground like a spider. He didn't know where I was, and I knew that. And then I heard Lewis start shooting. I heard it 100 yards behind me. That saw gun had a strange sound. Lewis had opened up on one. Another series of shots, and then there was silence. My eyes stayed forward, and I watched the one in front of me climb a tree. The sound of Lewis's gun must have spooked him, and he was getting higher so he could see. And that meant he wasn't looking for me. In the faint light of that foggy morning, I watched the biggest one I had ever seen so far shimmy up a giant oak trunk. He was on the other side, but his body was so wide that the higher he went, the more I could see of him. And finally he stopped and peeked his head around to see better. When that ugly head poked around that tree, my crosshair stopped right on his nose, and the rifle thumped against my shoulder with a solid recoil. Sometimes you just know you sent the bullet where you wanted it to go. And when I came back out of the recoil, the monster was not in the tree. I heard a crash and I knew he was down, and I waited. I waited for 10 minutes, just like waiting for a deer to die. And then there were sounds to my right. Slowly I moved my head to look and breathed easy when it was Lewis back at the boat. Lewis and I made eye contact only 30 yards away from each other, and my finger went to my lips, shushing him. 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes, and then 15 minutes passed, and nothing moved. My big boy was dead. He had to be. Lewis made a hand gesture like a knife, pointing to himself and then down the bank, and then another at me, making a left-hand curve. Well, I knew what he meant, and I nodded, and I stood, and I started walking a large arc. My eyes were searching everywhere, scanning the forest floor, looking for my kill. I made a 90-degree arc, and I began to close on that tree. My feet got snagged in some vines, and not watching where I was putting my feet because I was looking ahead, I had walked into some briars. I backed out and I moved farther to my left so that I had a clear line of sight to the base of that big oak. This thing wasn't dead. It was playing dead. Now this has happened a few times. I've heard some vets talk about the enemy playing dead or wounded. When you get to them, they reveal a grenade or they start shooting. Well, these squatches are not blessed with too many brains, but they will get creative. And I took one step, and I saw its head turn toward me, and with a grunt, it sprang to its feet and started running away from me. Holy shit, it was going straight at Lewis, and I yelled at him, "Coming at you, Lewis!" The saw began firing in its distinct cadence. Lewis was screaming at the top of his lungs the whole time. Oh shit, I thought, we have a problem. I ran as hard as I could in a straight line, dodging cypress knees the whole way, soaking myself in swamp water. One more burst from the saw, and that was it. And I kept my full speed ahead pace until I got to the sandbar, and I put on the brakes, splashing water all over the back of the smelliest, nastiest beast I had ever seen in my life. It was dead then. Exit wounds littered its back, and blood oozed from each hole like a well. Lewis had shot the shit out of this thing, but where was Lewis? "Lewis!" I yelled. "Lewis, where are you?" "Get this motherfucker off me," I heard a strained whisper. There, on the ground between the squatch's splayed legs, I saw a size 14 rubber boot, and it was twitching. Lewis Shanks is 6'6", and he weighs 300 pounds, and he's a big man. This thing was laying dead on top of him, and all I could see was a boot. I laid my rifle down and unslung my shotgun, and now, hands-free, I began to push on this monster. I rolled it a bit, but I couldn't get it off of Lewis. "I can't breathe," I heard Lewis say. So I pushed harder, and still the beast never moved. To make things faster and planning ahead, which is something I rarely do, I had had the forethought to throw my chainsaw in the boat. Figuring we would be in and out to make things faster, I would saw the heads off of these two that we were looking for originally and get out quickly. So I pulled the ripcord and it started, and I went to work on the leg that I knew Lewis wasn't under, and then I dragged it away. "Lewis, can you hear me?" I said while leaning down next to the squatch. "I can't keep cutting. I might cut you." Again, all I could see was his boot, but this time I got no answer from Lewis, and I was in a panic. The beast's left arm was above its head, and I made quick work of that one at the shoulder. I pulled it away, but I still couldn't see Lewis. I jumped to the other side and grabbed a 2-inch round squatch finger, and I pulled the other arm out from its side. And when it was fully extended, I cut it away and I killed the saw. I could see Lewis's fingers wiggling, and I knew what side he was on now. And without the added 300 pounds of a squatch leg and 2 squatch arms, this thing finally moved. Lewis began to appear as I pushed and he started helping me, and soon he was free. He rolled to his stomach and took huge gulps of air. And he lifted his big body off the ground and he stood there looking at the beast, and then he looked at me. He was covered in squatch blood and guts and sinew. He spit some out of his mouth. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Damn, Steve, I stink. Let's get out of here so I can take a shower," he said. "You sure as hell do stink, Lewis. You'll have to get a ride home or get in the bed of my truck. You can't ride in the cab." And I laughed. "You a son of a bitch, Steve Lilly." "Well, you sure got that right," I said. We got the two heads we could find pretty quickly and then searched the immediate area for the two I'd killed yesterday, but we never found them. I made a mental note that day to never leave a carcass in the field without taking its head right away. $10,000 had just gone down the drain, but each of us made $5,000 that day, and for the first hunt for Lewis, he wasn't complaining. On the drive home, I explained everything about how he would be paid, and I filled him in on the details. We wouldn't be paid until we got a call, if I got a call at all. I was in the dark on the whole thing, but I was positive. We stopped at Jack Purtle's Chicken in South Memphis, ordering from the drive-thru. We were starving and chicken was going to hit the spot. In a vacant parking lot next to Jack Purtle's, we sat in the truck and we ate every bite. The little flip phone sitting on the seat next to me, the government man had left, began to ring, and Lewis and I looked at each other with excitement. I opened the phone. "This is Steve Lilly," I said. "Don't say your damn name, Steve, when you answer this phone, dumbass," Lewis scolded me. Well, I looked at Lewis and I shrugged my shoulders and grinned. "I could have told you that, Steve," Lewis said. "Okay, hello? Looks like you and your friend have been busy this week, Steve. That was not a sanctioned hunt." "Right," I said. "You have 4 heads, am I correct?" the voice asked. "How'd you know that?" I replied. "We have our ways of knowing what's happening with these creatures, Steve. We're not happy you went on your own to do this, and we're very concerned you brought another individual with you." "Well, that's tough shit," I said. "If you want me to hunt these things, I'm going to need help." "I think we agree with you, Steve, and $30,000 will be delivered for this job." And then he finished with a location. "Bring your partner with you when we meet. Understood?" $30,000? I said with my voice raised. Lewis poked me in the shoulder and ran his knife hand across his throat, telling me to shut that shit up. "All right, $30,000 it is." The voice on the other end said, "We know you kill 6. We're satisfied with that, and we're going to pay you for all 6. Consider it a bonus and look at it as goodwill from us, that we mean what we say." "Well, I ain't going to argue with that," I said. The line went dead, and I flipped the phone closed and stared at the traffic running by in front of me. "Did I hear bonus?" Lewis asked. "You did," I said. "Get me home so I can watch this nasty shit off me," Lewis said. On the drive home, we both wondered out loud how they knew we killed those creatures. Were they in the woods watching? Well, that made no sense, but they knew all 6 squatches were dead. We agreed they weren't making it up, and these people must have been monitoring us somehow. We needed to figure that out. There might be cases that we didn't want to be monitored. 2 hours before, in the Blue Plate Cafe on Highway 61, directly east of Tunica Cutoff, a man sat at a table alone, sipping coffee. He was dressed so that he would be assumed to be a fisherman. With the bill of his cap pulled low on his brow, he fiddled with an electronic device. It was a prototype of the device that would be offered to the public 5 years later in 2007 as the iPhone. The waitress checked to see if he wanted to order food, and he declined. "Just coffee, thank you," he said. On the device, he typed in the words, "Outsource assets are adequate. Give them another job." He took another sip of his coffee and he waited. "Affirmative," was the reply. Can you confirm body count? The man at the table looked out the window and watched cars pass the cafe on Highway 61. He hated the gloomy Mississippi Delta, especially in the winter. But this was his district, though, so he made the best of his assignment. Before dawn, at the boat ramp farther south, he launched and began fishing. And this is what it looked like to anyone who saw him. With optics that could bring objects into focus from 1,000 yards, he watched the boys from the trailer park launch their boat and motor to the north end of the cutoff. Water was high enough that he worked his boat into some flooded timber, and he tied off to a tree and watched them from across the lake. He had seen the entire event. It was the day he began to admire their audacity and their skill in hunting the creatures. There was no need to think about his response. Pay them for 6. I watched it go down. He hit send and turned the phone off. After dropping the device in his coat pocket and paying his bill, he walked to the boat attached to his SUV. Making sure no one was around, he lifted the live well hatch to confirm the remaining 2 creatures' heads were secure. He headed south on Highway 61 away from Memphis, satisfied that his idea to use outside contractors to eliminate the creatures was a good one. Today had been a good day. His career was a solid lock now.
Road ahead is quite unclear. Let me walk it despite fear.